So again, this is another thing that I would say, you guys, that's really important to note is, you see, back then, because players did not have the preparation, the opening phase of the game, they had to think a lot more. So 30 moves in 2 hours. By today's standard, there are many games where players will make the first 20 to 25 moves in maybe 5 minutes. Just so we see the very first game, a couple of moves. So d4, d5, c4, c6, e3, bishop f5, knight c3, e6, knight f3, knight e7. Now the funny thing is, you guys, this is actually, by modern standards, this is still a very playable opening. This is the Slav defense, and neither side did anything wrong in the first 6 moves of the game. So even now, you see the players are very strong. Like they're nowhere near as accurate or playing in the same style we do today, but they did not make blunders at the very start of the game. So I thought I would just point this out. And this game between Steinitz and Kurt von Bardeleben was held in Hastings, England in 1895. Okay, so this game was pawn to e4. Kurt von Bardeleben, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, c3. This is, of course, the Gucci piano opening being played by Steinitz in this game. Since there are a lot of chess fans, I will say it pronounced correctly, and there probably are also a lot of Italians. This, of course, is the Gioco pianissimo. So it's where white develops the bishop to c4 very early instead of putting the bishop on b5. So bishop b5 is called the Spanish, or the Ruy Lopez. Bishop to c4 is called the Gioco piano, or the Gioco pianissimo. So it's, yeah, basically piano, of course, means like slow, and pianissimo means super slow. Those of you guys who are into music and play the piano know that, of course. Okay, so bishop c4, bishop c5 is played here. C3, knight to f6, d4 takes. Actually, no, lentissimo. Sorry, wrong word. Anyway, whatever. Okay, soft. Yeah, no, you guys are right. Lento. Sorry, wrong word. Okay, so d4 takes. C takes d4. Bishop b4 is played here. Knight c3 is played here by Steinitz. Von Bardeleben plays d5. You can also take the knight here. This is a whole different bag of fish. After knight e4, d5, knight to e7 castles. This is a very sharp line. I think generally this is sometimes still played even today, and this is pretty good for white. But the one thing we've learned over time is that you know, when people try to take the center very early with gambits, very oftentimes as black in these e4 e5 openings, you have to play in the center with like d5 or d6 really quickly to open up the position, which is why here von Bardeleben plays d5, pawn takes, knight takes. Of course, if white plays bishop takes knight, black can play queen takes bishop, and you can't recapture the queen because that would put your king under attack. So knight is currently pinned by the bishop on b4. So he castles. No, you guys, I know it means soft and super soft. I'm well aware of that. But yeah. Anyway, castles. There's bishop to e6. And now bishop to g5 is played here by Steinitz. Again, this is not precise play. Nowadays, normally when people play the play like this, what you do is in this position, there are a couple ways that you can play. d5 is one of them. But nowadays, I think it's the main line goes knight e4 castles, and I think it's bishop c3 d5, and then you have knight e5, and this is a very long theoretical line that is played these days. I'm not really going to go into depth in that because that's not really the purpose of the games that I'm showing, but there are a lot of ways you can play against it, but you almost always have to play in the center here. So after castles, bishop to e6, here white plays bishop to g5, so Steinitz tries to attack the queen on d8, finish the development, and bring his rooks to the center of the board. So bishop e7 is played. Steinitz takes, and now he takes the bishop. All even trades. They even trades, and now rook to e1. And this is where one thing that's really important is that development matters. So you see how white is castled here. If black has one more move, let's just say you go a3 and black gets castled, black is doing really well here. The king is out of the center of the board, and white has an isolated pawn, or an isolani as they would call it in Italian, on d4, which is very weak here. So that's why because the tempo is really important, white can play rook e1. And now you cannot castle your king, so if you do, you will lose your juicer on e7. So now f6 is played. Very logical move, by the way. The idea is to move the king to f7 and bring the rooks to the center of the board. Also, it's really important because if you ever go like king f8, white can maybe jump with the knight to e5, and there's like queen h5, maybe queen b3. A lot of ideas with the knight being on e5. So f6 is a very logical move. It stops the knight jumps. You try to dominate the knight with the pawn, and you prepare a square for your king to move to get out of this very, very nasty pin on the e file here. So now here, queen to e2 is played by Steinitz. Von Bartolobin plays queen d7, rook to c1, c6 here. Now maybe king f7 is actually okay for black. It's not really clear. I think, I mean, I do vaguely recall there's a line with like, there's some line I think with check and queen f5 and like queen b7. Is it queen b7 or is it queen? Actually no, it's queen b3. And I think this is supposed to be some kind of weird draw with queen e6, queen f6 and queen f5. But again, very, very dank, very advanced. So here Von Bartolobin, basically I think what he was worried about was this, and maybe queen c4 and some kind of right triangle threat, or something along these lines. So he goes c6, and the idea here is basically he wants to move the king, but he wants to support the square for the knight on d5. Theoretical basically means an opening strategy that has been reviewed and is known and it's playable, basically. Well, known, I think, not necessarily playable, but that it's very known. So here Steinitz plays d5. This is one of the things that's really important to note, is that again, the understanding of the piece play for where you want your pieces really is important. And Lasker versus Lasker, I'm not going to go over that right now, but I will go over games that Emmanuel played down the road. So d5 is a very logical move, and the reason this is such a good move is that when black takes the pawn, because you think, okay, well, you're just gambiting a pawn, the reason it's such a great move is that now after you go knight to d4, you have an open file. So even though you've gambited a pawn, you have an open file for your rook. Your other rook is really good, and your queen on e2 is good, and your knight on d4 is good. So you have 4 very well developed pieces. Black has a king and 2 rooks that are not developed, and your king is not going to get out of the center of the board. So here king f7 was played by Von Bartolobin. Steinitz plays knight to e6. Now again, very important move, because the point is you're threatening to go rook to c7 here. The knight holds the square. The knight also potentially threatens to capture. You also have queen g4 to hit the pawn on g7, and more right triangles as well. So this is very hard to play for black. As you guys can see from the valuation, also white is completely winning too. So rook h to c8 is played by Von Bartolobin. The idea, of course, you want to get this rook in the game because you'd love to play here, and just if I make an empty move, a3, king g8, your king is very safe here on g8. So you really would rather do that, because if at some point, you know, like this happens, your rook in the corner is very sad. The king is in the way and it's not in the game. So that's why rook h c8 makes a lot of sense. Steinitz goes queen to f4, attacking the pawn on g7, eyeing a target towards the queen on d7 as well. You maybe have knight g5 to fossilize the queen and the king. So now here Von Bartolobin plays g6, Steinitz plays knight to g5. So exactly as I said, you make the check because black had to move the pawn, and now you attack the king, but you also attack the queen. So now here Von Bartolobin plays king to e8, Steinitz plays rook takes rook. Now one thing that's amazing here is when you look at the position, black is still up a pawn. Black has 4 5 6, white has 1 2 3 4 5. So black is still up a pawn here, and potentially, like if you trade queens, black is just, I mean, maybe not much better, but black is completely fine here. You don't really have any attacking ideas at this point. So that's why Steinitz plays rook takes rook. Von Bartolobin plays rook takes rook, or no, sorry, yeah. Let me go back. So knight g5, king e8. So he plays rook takes e7 first. Sorry, wrong one. Rook takes e7. Sorry, I had this in my notes for some reason. So rook takes e7 is played here. Now again, it doesn't work because if you play the other order with rook c8, if you play rook takes e7 here, black can just take with the king. And now it's like, wait, what's going on? Now you're just lost because there's going to be a classic potential ice skater with rook c1 coming, and you only have a queen and a knight, so you have no way really to attack here. So that's why first you play rook takes knight. And the first thing that I would point out here is that black cannot play queen takes rook, because then you will take the rook. Black takes back, and you take back with the check, so black does not have time to play queen e1 and make the ice skater. You would have to block, and then you can very simply just trade, and even you could take the pawn, you could also move the knight back, and it's completely winning for white. So after rook takes e7 here, you're probably wondering, well, why can't black take? What's the difference with the rooks versus the rook? And the difference in this position is that there's a really beautiful tactic. You can play queen to b4 check here. If black goes king to d8, you go queen to f8 check, queen to e8. Now you go knight to f7. King cannot come to c7 because the rook holds it, can't go to e7. You also can't capture the queen or the knight because you're in check. So you have to come up, and then after queen d6, the knight and the queen hold each other, and the king is checkmated. You have no squares to go to, and white wins the game by force. So you can't go to d8. So what else can you do? You can play king to e8, but it's going to be much of the same here. You go rook to e1. Your king can't go over this way because your knight and queen hold the squares, so you have to run this way. And now white goes knight to e6. And if you play king to f8 here, or king to e8, sorry, white goes queen to f8. The knight and the queen hold each other. The king has no squares again. And when black plays queen takes knight, you just go rook takes queen, rook to c1, and rook to e1. And there's no potential ice skater. The queen protects the rook, and the king is very safe. You'll probably just play h3 and go king h2 and create some lift for the king, and you're going to be ahead with a queen or one rook. And the last part is after king e7 queen b4. Let's say black tries to block with queen to d6. If black blocks with queen to d6 here, what you do is you play queen takes pawn. Black can't really block with the rook because you would just take. If black goes king to d8 to protect this rook from being captured, then you go knight f7, forking the king and the queen. And after king 8 knight d6, you're just very simply winning because it's still check. There's no way to make the ice skater. And if black goes king to f8, you can go queen to f7, checkmate, knight and queen hold each other. And if you go king to e8, same thing. You go rook to e1. If the king goes over, it's checkmate. King goes here, checkmate. If you block with the queen, just rook takes queen, pawn takes rook, and now you go queen f7 check, king to d8, and knight to e6. Force checkmate again. The king has no squares, and that's all she wrote. So this is winning for white. All right, so let's go back. So this is the big difference in the game between playing the other order. Now the funny thing here, and again, I'm not a historian, so I don't know I don't know like the stories behind these games, is that it's still not clear after king f8 why white is winning here necessarily. Because if you look at the position, again, if you capture the queen with either the rook or the queen, you actually get ice skater in the back. Your king has no space. You have no your king is just dead. So it's quite tricky here after king f8 to find the right move. And it's worth noting, for example, there's only one move here that is winning easily. Like if you play rook takes rook here, for example, after rook takes rook, again, there's still the looming idea of the check on c1. And I guess the computer says you can make a check, takes, and play like h3. Again, very dank, very difficult to win. So that's why it's actually a tricky position. But here Steinitz, being the world champion, being the strongest player in the world, found a brilliant idea. So he goes rook to f7, and if black takes, it's the same thing. You just take the rook and you take the rook. So after check, if black goes to e8 with the king, you can just make a check with this rook. Or actually, sorry, no, you can actually, this is just easy. You just take with checkmate here, because the rook and the queen hold each other. And so black goes king g8. Again, now you go rook g7, same thing. If black takes with the queen, you take all the rooks at the end of the board. And so after rook g7, black can't really take with the queen because of this threat where you win the rooks. And if black takes with the king, now you can take the queen, and it's a check from d7 towards the king on g7. So you still wonder, well, what's the difference? Now black goes king h8. Now here black could go king f8, but after king f8, you go knight takes pawn with a check on the king. And again, it's the same problem. If you go king takes rook, there's queen takes queen with check. If you go king e8, there's just queen takes queen, which is just checkmate because the knight holds the square for the king, and the rook and the queen hold all the other squares the king can go to. So that's why black goes king to h8. And now here, after rook takes h7, I've heard the story, so someone in chat can tell me if this is true or not, but the story goes that basically at this point von Barleben, he didn't actually resign the game, that he got up and left the room and he never came back. Basically he just it is true. Okay, I don't know if it's true, but yeah, apparently after rook takes h7, I don't know if he got up before the move, but he got up and left. Like he literally got up and went home. He never came back to the board, and I believe he lost the game on the on clock, I assume, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, he literally got up and left the room and never came back. So yeah, that's he even cursed, they say. Oh, okay, yeah. So basically it's like, now there is no rule against this, by the way, to be clear. I had this happen in a game of mine too, where someone got up and I think their friends convinced them to come back like an hour and a half later to just resign the game. But yeah, so basically what happened is that at this point he got up from the board and he just left. And whether he went home, went to the bar, or what he did, he just didn't come back and finish the game. So, and the reason for that is because here, if black takes with the queen, it's the same problem. You still can just trade the rooks at the end of the board, and the king is in check and you're winning. And so black doesn't really want to take, but after king to g8, the problem here is that you go rook to g7 again. And now what happens? Well, again, it's the same thing. If you take, you lose the queen with check. If you go here, it's the same thing. I make the check and you lose the queen with check. Next move. If you go queen takes rook, of course I just take the rook. It's all basically the same except one pawn is missing. So after rook g7, king to h8, this is where there's a really beautiful checkmate, which is now, because there's no pawn here, you can play queen to h4. If there was a pawn, this is why the whole tactic is so incredible, is because in this position there's no way to make a check. But after you play the same sequence with king g8 here, king h8, you can now go queen h4. There's no pawn in the way and it's a forced check. And now after king takes rook, you go queen h7, king to f8, and now you make what we call a staircase. You go up down up down up down, or a zigzag, where you go queen h8, king e7, queen to g7. If black goes king to d6 here, you just take the pawn. King cannot run because your rook holds all these squares, and after queen e6 you just take with check. Knight is protecting the queen. Again, this is a forced checkmate. And now, so here you go king to e8, white goes queen to g8, king to e7, and now you go queen to f7 check. And again, the knight is protecting the queen. If you go king d6, again queen takes f6, and it's the same thing, just checkmate. So you have to go king to d8. And now the checkmate is queen to f8, hitting the king, no escape square because your rook guards it. Black blocks, and you do the same thing. You go knight to f7 check. Queen cannot capture the knight because you're pinned by the queen on f8. You have to go to d7, and now you go queen to d6, and that's checkmate. The knight protects the queen, and the king has no squares. If you Google Steinitz rage quit, this is the first game. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what I heard. Like, that's what I heard, at least as far as the story goes, is that basically, yeah, after rook h7, whether von Bartheleben saw the checkmate, saw the idea with the checkmate or not, that he just got up and went home. So yeah, this is one of the most amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. This is one of the most amazing checkmates, or not checkmates, but one of the most amazing themes that you will see, where basically you just keep checking along the row. The knight is just always protecting the rook, and then you play queen h4 at the very end of this. And whether von Bartheleben saw this or not, he clearly was very upset, and he just got home, and he just got upset, went home, and he said no and left, basically, without resigning the game. So yeah, at this point Steinitz was not young, right? Steinitz was not young when this game was played. This game was played in 1895. Steinitz was born in 1830s, was it? When was he born? Maybe yeah, he was born in 1836. So yeah, so at this point Steinitz, when this game was played, was nearly 60 years old. So he was not young by any sense of the imagination. And it's still, you see how good this game was played at the age of 59. He played this really beautiful game. Maybe von Bartheleben was a bad loser. I mean, of course. Wouldn't be shocking. But the knight was hanging the whole time. The knight was just, yeah, the knight was always hanging, but it didn't matter because black's king was always in check. It was just always check. He left because of humiliation due to loud crowd noise, crowd applaud that happened after the brilliant game. Okay. But anyway, yeah. But it's amazing game played by Steinitz. And I think in terms of Steinitz games, this is probably the game that he's most remembered for, because it's just some incredible it's just an incredible sequence of moves with rook h7 and this rook h8, and then just the beautiful staircase. Actually, sorry, you have to play the right order, by the way. You have to go check first. Also worth noting, you can't go rook h8 because if it takes queen h4, I go here, and you don't actually get the check because the queen on d7 holds the square on h7. So yeah, even this, you still have to be precise. You still have to be precise with rook g7 and then queen h4, and then it's just the zigzag. You go check, 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 and then check and mate. And it's just very beautiful forced checkmate. So yeah, one mistake and it's over. Yeah, pretty much. Why can't the king take when the rook is on g7? So this is what's amazing, is that if you were to take the rook, then I take your queen, and you don't have time to take this rook because your king is in check. That's why it's an amazing concept. Whenever you take with a king, you lose your queen, and whenever you take with the queen, then you lose both rooks, and I just have an extra knight on g5 here. So it's just a very beautiful game, and I think for me it's probably my favorite Steinitz game by far.